I'm gonna scream so fucking loud right now. So that's why I hate rescheduling meetings, because then you reschedule this thing and everything is messed up. He's having a hard time getting in now.
Yeah, it's saying the same thing for him that it said for me though.
Yeah. So I just gave him how to do the new meeting. I don't know. Sometimes it drives me crazy.
You'd rather me go in your room. I'm gonna go for a walk.
Is it me or you? I'm saying. So your volume sounded kind of low.
Yeah, it won't be that bad.
Huh?
Talking to Jordan.
Oh. Yeah, your volume sounds kind of low. I don't know if.
I was whispering.
No, that's better.
Yeah, all I have to do is put the bass in.
Let me see what's going on. Hold on. There he is.
Hey guys.
Hey Pete, sorry about that, man.
No worries. No worries.
Sometimes when you reschedule meetings and you try to do a new Zoom and it keeps the old Zoom and.
Yeah, no, I've run into that before, so no worries, man.
Yeah, I'm like I probably do, I don't know, 35 Zooms a week. I'm so zoomed out. It's not even funny, but
I read an article recently. I guess it was a couple months ago at this point, about Zoom fatigue, like people switching everything in their lives to suddenly be on Zoom like 12 hours a day, and how old that gets pretty quickly.
It's old. I mean, it's the only way to do it. I mean, meet with our kids this way. We meet with you guys this way. But my job, probably 9 meetings a week. Then clients. So yeah, I mean, it's way too much. I mean, it's nice I don't leave my house, but
yeah. I'm not wearing any pants.
What's that?
I'm not wearing any pants.
Yeah, I know. Oh, I literally did that the other day. I rushed from a shower to get on a meeting, and I had like shorts on the floor, so I had to like sneak. I'm doing like this. I'm like putting shorts on while I'm on a call with people, but no one knows that. So our secret's good here.
Yeah, except for we're recording this to broadcast it live. So.
Yeah, but I'll make sure I edit that part out.
Yeah, I mean, you guys have the fatigue of just sitting at the Zoom all day. I get to see firsthand the people who just absolutely refuse to evolve with the new technology. I work at a restaurant, and if you've been out in a restaurant, they have the little scanner cards that you pull your phone out and you scan in, it pulls the menu up on your phone.
Yeah.
You don't have to touch anything. And some people come up and they flat out look at me today and they go, "No, we're not doing that. We're old. Give us the paper ones." And I was like, "All right, you're going to share though, because I'm not giving you 6 paper menus."
Yeah, right.
But it's funny seeing the people who light up their eyes and they go, "Oh, wow, that was really easy. That was super easy. I can do this." And I was like, "Yeah, you can." And then there's people who just go, "I'm not doing that. Give me the paper. I'm old." I was like, "All right."
Right. And there's not that much to it. If they actually decided to do it, they'd see it's pretty simple.
there's nothing to it, and they complain about how it's small. I'm like, but you got a text message right now, you'd read that too. Just,
Yeah.
you know, the print is the same size. If you held your phone up to the paper, they're the exact same size print. So, but some people don't like it. Screens scare people.
Do you guys know each other? I mean, I don't know if we bumped into each other, or you kind of been out.
Yeah, I don't know if we've met before.
Travis.
What's going on, man? When did you graduate at Ridgefield?
I graduated 2011.
Yeah, so Gary, I was probably bringing kids to your tournament when Travis was wrestling.
Yeah, I think so. That's what I was, But he was in his own. He was wrestling his own zone. He wasn't talking to people.
Oh yeah. I don't know why you would notice me.
Right.
No, I wouldn't notice you, but I mean, if I had wrestled an Edgemont kid in the semis or the finals, yeah, I would have known Edgemont was at the tournament. You know.
Yeah, right.
I'm pretty sure it was Somers and Monroe Woodbury. So that's where my mind was the whole day.
Yeah.
Those two teams. So.
Yeah, and then I don't think you guys have been back since Travis has been coaching. So
no, we had to move our tournament to that same weekend because they moved our county tournament to the weekend that we were formerly hosting our own tournament on. That's been a problem we've run into.
Well,
and who knows what's going to happen this year.
That was the same problem that we ran into with the New York teams being able to stay in the tournament because they didn't know who was until a week before who was getting into the sectional tournament, whatever. So we'd be sitting there, and all of a sudden, Monroe Woodbury pulls out, number 5 in New York, best team that we got coming. They pull out, and we're like, "What do we do?"
It's a pain in the ass, man.
So we scheduled. We got some mass teams.
Breathe sighs of relief when you get the big teams like that. You get the number 5 team in New York drops out. A lot of kids are going, "Oh, I got a shot. All right, it's my day."
I guess it depending on what your perspective is, it could be good or that could be bad.
Yeah.
For us, it's usually bad. For us personally, as coaches, it's definitely not good.
Yeah.
But we brought some mass teams in, some Rhode Island teams, Long Island. So it's still competitive, and we get John Jake brings some of the team, and Monroe already sent some guys, so it's still really competitive. So it's cool.
Well,
anytime you want to come back, let us know.
I appreciate it. I mean, you guys run a great tournament, and even more importantly, great food in the coaches' room.
Yes. More importantly, absolutely.
No coach forgets to acknowledge that, which is just my favorite thing.
I think that says volumes about how good it is.
Yeah. Funny thing is though, you get the teams that come, and you have regular assistants, and you have assistants who show up like once in a while. They come with all their assistants,
I believe it.
And some of them, like high school, man, they have everybody's 260, 6'5", and everybody wants free coupons. I'm like, you guys are gonna kill me. Eat me out of house and home. Anyway,
funny, man, I believe it.
So yeah, man. So I definitely, you and I had a talk. I gave Travis a little background on the reason that I thought I reached out to you. Trav, I was saying. Winning Mindset did a program, like a full day program about a month ago, maybe a little more than a month ago. And coaches came on and talked about different things. And Pete came on and talked about his WinSmarter program, which is really building, I would say it's more building a culture than anything else, building a program, building a culture. And I wanted to kind of get him on to talk about, his beginnings in coaching, and then he clearly talks about the struggles early on, and kind of feeling his way through, and then kind of growing it into a program. And he's got a lot of cool stuff that he does, and I've been reading through it, looking at it myself, because I'm definitely going to adapt some of that for us. So that's kind of what I want to go through today, Pete. That's cool.
Yeah, that's great. What did you have like a time frame in mind, or you just want to take it as it comes?
It's funny. When we first started this podcast, we were like, okay, let's keep it to 20 minutes because every kid's attention span is so short. We've yet to do that. Everybody goes longer. That's good because people are interesting. We have good conversations. We're usually probably somewhere in the 45-minute range by the time we kind of edit a little bit out. So anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour. But again, we've had some short ones. So it depends. However it flows and however it goes is cool with us.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. I'm not in any hurry, so I'm down for whatever you guys want.
Yeah, and just for this, I'll do an intro separately. So, we'll just start talking right now, and this is recording. We'll edit it out. I'll do an intro separately, and then I know you have a page that like an ebook that you want to give to them. I'll put that in the show notes, and we can also mention it at the end on the closing of this, how they can reach you and how they can get a hold of that book.
Yeah, that's great. That's great. I'm gonna try to having done a bunch of these sorts of things before, I'm gonna try to we should talk obviously about ideas and concepts and philosophical stuff, but I'm going to try to give as much like concrete ideas and tactics that coaches can implement in their program. And I know that you have a lot of athletes that are listening as well as coaches. So to the extent that I can tie some of that back to tactics that athletes could use for themselves or with their team, as opposed to just talking to the coaching audience, I'll try to work that in also. Just with the idea being to give as much value to the people listening to your podcast as I possibly can.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's great. I think sometimes our biggest struggle is, especially when we talk to current athletes, or even like we get someone who's a professional, like a fighter or somebody. We've been trying to break down like the nuances of what they do, and we're looking for like that bullet point schedule that like every 30 minutes you got something written down. And sometimes it's tough to get that concrete laid out, here's your plan. So any type of detail like that really helps the listeners, gives them something to really template and work off of. But if you could just tell us about just how you started with sports, take us back to childhood. How'd you fall in love with it? How'd you find it? Let's just get down to the little.
We'll go through that quickly, just a little bit of getting wrestling and then talk about, your fire department, background, which kind of you kind of pointed that it led to a little bit of this. So just kind of start with us and we'll go from there.
Yeah, that sounds great. Oh, right now, go for it. Okay.
Well, yeah, go.
How do you get started in sports? When did you start playing sports?
Yeah, so I've been playing sports in one form or another my whole life. I grew up in Edgemont, where I coach right now. We didn't have any kind of youth wrestling in our community back then. That was in the 80s. So I came up playing, soccer, football, baseball, basketball. I guess you'd call it like more mainstream sports than wrestling, at least in our area. Then I got to junior high, and we had a middle school wrestling team. I didn't know anything about it. Didn't know anything about wrestling. I was playing football, and I knew that our middle school football coach was the middle school wrestling coach. So he was trying to convince me and my friends to do it the whole season, the whole football season. And some of my friends were kind of into the idea, and I totally was not into the idea of it at all. But like a lot of your decisions when you're like a 12 or 13-year-old, you kind of go with what your friends are doing. So I jumped into it. I thought I was going to be like flying off the ropes and breaking chairs over guys' heads, because I had no idea. I'd never seen a real wrestling match. But I jumped into it. I was like average at best. Maybe I was 3-3 my first year. Got a little bit better in 8th grade. Decided to stick with it in high school, which was a decision that I could have gone either way on probably when I was in 9th grade. But I was a smaller kid, and it turned out as I went through high school, it was probably the sport that I excelled at the most. I loved playing football. I enjoyed playing baseball, but I was wrestling 126 in the postseason my senior year in high school. Like I was never had a big future in football. But I liked the physicality of it. And so wrestling was kind of like as it turned out, like the perfect outlet for me, because it gave that physicality and the ability to like compete in that kind of way with that kind of mentality, the same sort of mentality that I found in football, but I didn't feel like I was getting my butt knocked all over the place by dudes that were like twice as big as me. So I stuck with it. I was fortunate enough to be able to go to Cornell and be on the team there. Not recruited by Coach Cole in any way, shape, or form, but I was like more the guy that was getting beat up in practice every day and helping the guys that were in the lineup get better. And honestly, that was real tough at the time, but looking back on it, it's like you learn a lot from that. You take away a lot from that. So I graduated. Without getting into too much detail about it, I actually got hired by the fire department, New York City Fire Department. I'm a New York City firefighter. It's my full-time job. I got hired right after September 11th. So I was planning on becoming a firefighter. I was on the list waiting to get hired. They probably would have hired me right after September 11th, regardless of what happened on September 11th. So it was just really coincidental timing. So I've been a firefighter for almost 19 years now. And that next winter is when I first started coaching. So this will be my 19th season coaching, going in all at Edgemont High School. I started off as an assistant coaching for my coach, working with my high school coach who needed an assistant. And I was fortunate enough to have the work schedule and the flexibility in that schedule to jump into it with him. So I coached with him for a couple of years. He'd actually stepped away. And the program that we had, what little we did have, completely kind of fell apart. We didn't have much to begin with. So he was kind of starting from scratch, and I came in with him. And to his credit, he really gave me a lot of room to grow as a coach. We were not, I mean, we didn't have a lot to work with. There's no other way to say it than we sucked. We had only a handful of kids on the team. And we had a lot of the issues that you hear about everywhere now, kids just, lack of commitment. Like we only had 6 kids in our lineup. We couldn't win a dual meet no matter, even if all 6 of them won, but that never happened anyway. But they weren't committed. Their parents didn't get it. They didn't get it. There was always excuses, kids not showing up for tournaments, kids quitting before the season was over. Just feeling like everyone was kind of there for themselves and not for the team so much. And it was tough. It was real frustrating. And at the time, George, who I coached with, he gave me a lot of autonomy. He gave me a lot of room to grow as a coach. I think he knew he was getting towards the end of his coaching career and kind of was hoping that I would be the person to take over for him. But, it was frustrating because he didn't have the answers. And, I didn't have the answers, but you come in as like an arrogant, and I'll say that I was probably arrogant, 23-year-old whose last experience in wrestling was as an athlete in college. And you think you know everything, and you think that you're going to come right in and fix it because you saw how high level wrestling worked. And anyone who's been in that situation, and I would imagine a lot of coaches see like bits of themselves there. Like, that's not how it works. The things that coaching is very muid an art and very much a science, and there's a lot to it that you don't appreciate necessarily as a student athlete. And so, I had to learn that the hard way. And there was a lot of frustration, a lot of like sleepless nights, and a lot of off seasons, like opening up the gym or opening up the wrestling room and having like 1 kid show up or 2 kids show up who were like 60 pounds apart from each other in weight. They couldn't even wrestle each other. And you're like, why am I waking up at 7 in the morning or coming here on a Thursday night to open up and have 2 kids show up? Like, what am I doing here? That kind of self-talk. And what I eventually realized was, and I think I got a lot of this from the culture of the fire department and just from the culture of maybe the team I was on in college, that our biggest problem wasn't the wrestling. It wasn't the technical side. I thought that's what the coaching was, but it was really all these other things that formed our culture, and that our culture influenced. And it's those things like getting buy-in and commitment from the kids on your team, building mental toughness, getting parents to kind of support you and buy into what you're doing, creating a team where they're kind of not only mentally tougher, but more committed to each other, less all about themselves and more about the team. And that can be a controversial take in wrestling on its own. Maybe we can get into that, like how selfish you need to be to excel in wrestling versus how selfless you need to be to have a great team in wrestling. But I was almost from a point of like being at my wit's end. I was just digging into anything I could to make our program better. I was reading any book I could get my hands on. I was buying DVDs. I was going to coaching clinics. I was calling up coaches that didn't even know me to ask them if they would, if they'd answer some questions I had about how they did things in their program. Like I was scraping and scouring. And this was at a time in the early 2000s when you weren't overwhelmed by resources on the internet. So I was kind of like, anything I could get my hands on that was even like tangentially related to coaching, sports psychology, building a culture, motivating people. Like I was all over it. And so over time, right, you learn a little bit and you implement things, and some things work and some things don't. And you kind of iterate on that and you improve step by step. And that was kind of our journey where eventually, things started clicking. And there was never like this, everyone wants to hear about an aha moment when like the light bulb came on and you just got it. But like the truth is that there wasn't that moment. It was like real life. You work hard and you get knocked down and you get back up and you make a little bit of progress, and then you get knocked on your ass again and you think things are going good and you take a step back again. And, slowly you look back over your shoulder to 2 years, 3 years, 5 years ago, and you realize how far you've come, but it doesn't feel that way as you're walking through that journey. And I think that was, if like talk about advice for younger coaches, like if that's one, it's not necessarily the easy advice that people want to hear, but I think it's an important advice that a lot of coaches, younger coaches should hear. Like that's how it works. There's not going to be that one technique video you watch on Flow that suddenly changes everything in your program.
Yeah.
People tend to look, I think it's human nature. Our kids do it too, right? Everyone's looking for the shortcut. But the shortcut is really staying focused on the process and being consistent with it over a long period of time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think one of the things that advice to young coaches too, or anyone in general, is, keep a journal. That helps to, start journaling, and then you can kind of look back and you can reflect and you can see the progress a little clearer. But yeah, I can relate to what you're talking about. It's one kid at a time. It's, you think you've got it all mastered, and all of a sudden you turn around and no one shows up to practice, and you're back to where you were, and then you put it ahead of yourself, and it's a building process. And obviously you kind of really sunk your teeth into it, and, you had the commitment that you were hoping to get from those kids. And that's the difference maker, having that commitment and wanting to do it. So
what,
you guys have a youth program at that time?
No, we started one, maybe my third year, we started a youth program. So we've had one for maybe about 15 years now. And that's huge. I think that, I think having a youth program as a feeder, whether or not you have a middle school program also, but having a youth program, I think is huge. And I think the more directly you can be involved in that as the varsity coach, the more value it brings. I think it's a really underrated aspect. And I think it's so underrated that coaches look to offload it and delegate it. And I think you have to learn how to delegate effectively to be a coach, because there's just too much to manage. It's really CEO skills. But that said, that the biggest, my opinion, has always been the single biggest thing that any of us can do to improve the level of our programs is focus on our ability to recruit kids into our program and retain them in our program. And so if you buy into that, if you believe that, that's going to impact your program far more than whatever technique you choose to focus on in the room, or what the way you're structuring, your strength and conditioning. Like if you buy into that, then I think you need to buy into, well, the way I'm going to get the most kids in my high school program, at least in a community like the one I coach in, is starting them young and getting them hooked and getting them falling in love with wrestling early. So later on, come middle school, when they have to finally make a choice between basketball and wrestling, we at least have a handful of kids who are pre-programmed to say, well, I love wrestling, I'm going to stick with that. Mm-hmm. And I think the flip side of that same coin is that, and I tell this to my head youth coach now all the time, I go, the single metric that we're evaluating you on is your year-to-year retention rate. Absolutely. And that means that you're going to have to think about that when you're deciding how you're running your practices, how hard you're running your practices, how much fun you're incorporating, because, you could develop, a team full of 10-year-old hammers but if they all quit before they get up to my team, then what have we really accomplished?
Right.
So, you know, I say it half joking, but half serious. Like, I don't care if you're sending me kids that don't know the difference between a single leg and a double leg, but if they think they love wrestling, like, we'll take it. Like, we can teach them to wrestle.
Yeah.
You know, we will overcome that. And in fact, like, that's bared out in our program. You know, our last, the 3 individual New York State champions I've coached, all of them wrestled on the youth level. None of them really competed much at all until they were in middle school, even though they'd been wrestling in our youth program since 2nd or 3rd grade. None of them wrestling was their primary sport, but they were all reached a point where they fell in love with wrestling, even though they had no idea what they were doing. And those are the kids that went on in our program to be all-state wrestlers or New York State champions and wrestling, you know, in college at the Division I or Division III level. So, you know, we kind of fell into that, but now I'll sing the praises of that all day. And I think having your coaches, your youth coaches, on that same page philosophically is important. You know, I talk to a lot of coaches about it, you know, or I guess you could say consult with a lot of coaches about trying to improve their youth programs and their feeder programs. And like, I hate to say it, but one of the big problems you see a lot is when you have parents running the program instead of other coaches, because it's hard for parents to emotionally separate themselves from their kids. Yep. You know, Gary, you've coached your kids, and like, I'm sure that's something that you've thought about quite a bit over the years, but you're a high school coach, you know, so you're presumably putting a lot more effort into your craft than maybe a youth coach who's helping out a couple nights a week. And, you know, you see it a lot in other sports, right? Where like youth football coaches bring their rec team to like the finals of their league, whatever rec league they play in. And it's like they're a Super Bowl coach all of a sudden. Like that's their Super Bowl. And it's unintentionally, I think, because I think anyone who volunteers to coach is helping out children and is presumably doing it for good reasons. But I think getting too caught up in it rather than focusing on having fun and developing the kids is a long-term detriment to your kids and your program.
Yeah. It's as you said, they have good intentions. It's an emotional thing. You have to really work at it to separate the emotion. And just going back real quickly to your point about a youth program, you know, we just recently had, last podcast, we had Coach Ricky Shook from Danbury High School and Scott Legacy, formerly of Mount Anthony, you know, 2 of the best programs in New England. And they both talked about the value of having youth program. And as you said, of connecting with the youth, with the parents, building a community, and then having their kids go back, their high school kids go back and be a part of that youth program as well, whether it's running tournaments or helping coach, whatever, to build that cohesiveness. And then anybody in our area who knows Danbury, I mean, when they make it to our conference finals, kids make it, the team dyes their hair blonde. And virtually half of Danbury kids, even kids who don't wrestle, dye their hair blonde. You walk through Danbury for that month, and there's so many little kids with bleached blonde hair because of the wrestling program. And, you know, there's a lot of reasons why they're great, but that's a main reason why they're great. Because as you said, attrition, when you bring 40 kids into the youth program and you lose 10, you still have 30 to work with. When you bring 6 kids into the youth program and you lose 4, you only got 2. And those numbers just are what those numbers are. So
right, and any way you slice it, there's still 14 weight classes that you need to fill at the high school level.
Yeah.
Or unfortunately now in New York, 13, but that's a whole other story.
That's a whole other story.
So Pete, I guess my first question that I was thinking as I was hearing you talk, because you talk about as you're, you know, when you're talking about looking over your shoulder, that 3rd, 4th, 5th year down the line and looking back to those first few years, what would your first and best piece of advice to that first year coach, with the exception of obviously, you know, keep going, right? Don't get down on yourself. Like, what would your best piece of advice to that first year guy going back now that you are even 5 years or 10 years down the line, wherever you are now?
You know, that's a great question. I get asked that a lot, and I'll tell you what I would say, but I'll also tell you why I don't know that it's necessarily a great answer. I think that I would say that, you know, we needed to, what I wish that I did a lot earlier in my coaching career was focus on building our culture, making that a real focus. And I alluded to that a little bit before, but I think what's really important to start that is to get really clear for yourself as a coach on kind of what your vision is for your program, what you want your program to look like. What are you aspiring to create here? You know, because it's really easy to have these ideas floating around in your head, but it's a very different thing to put it down on paper. You know, how many kids do you want? Like, what do you want to see, hear, and feel when you walk through your practices? Like the vibe. What do you want your interactions with the parents in your program or your AD or your school administration to be like? You know, what do you want your kids accomplishing on the mat? What do you want your kids accomplishing in the community, off the mat, and in school in their academics? Like really getting clear on that kind of vision, I think is super important. Defining or narrowing down and kind of defining what are the most important like core values that you hold to build that vision around. You know, so we have 5 core values in our program. We revisit them every year with our kids because we bring them into the process of determining that. So they kind of evolve year to year. But right now our 5 core values are habits, improvement, accountability, family, and joy. Those are our 5 core values. And so it started off with me figuring out what to me as a coach was most important. And then it involved bringing our coaching staff in and giving them input and bringing our student athletes in. And now it's evolved to the point where we have a really specific process we go through every year to involve our student athletes in revisiting that and then building standards around that. So I would say to a first year coach, like getting clear on that stuff, your vision and your values and your standards is probably the basis of your culture. And that's what I would say to start with. The reason I don't think that that's necessarily great advice is because I think it's almost impossible as a first year coach to do that, because I think that you need to have a little bit of time to fail and to get your feet under you and to figure out like kind of systems and how your program works and, you know, what the season looks like, what your practices look like, what your interactions with your student athletes look like, you know, the kind of that dynamic that you have within the athletic program in your school. I think that you need to really get your feet under you and settled on solid ground before you're in a place where going through those exercises of defining your vision and your values become really effective. So, you know, I go back and forth on the best thing to say to a first year coach. It's really easy to like preach like you need a vision and you need values, but I think it's a little bit harder to get really honest with coaches about you do need that, but you know, just accept the fact that, you know, you're not going to be really good at your job for the first year or so, and you need to figure that out. You need to just kind of find solid footing upon which you can build.
Maybe the answer that, you know, that your really message you're saying is start thinking about those values, start thinking about what you want your culture and your values to be, but it's going to take a little while before you get your feet underneath you and you understand everything else is going around, right? So, but that's great advice to start thinking about it, because I think a lot of young coaches don't. I think going back to what you said originally, people are thinking about how do I teach a high crotch, right? What's the latest move? Let me go on flow and find the latest move. If I teach that, we're going to be successful. When the reality, for anybody who's coached for a while, as you said, that's not the foundation. That's not really what makes your program successful. Because we could teach, you know, guys have been around, you could teach 6 moves all season long. If you teach those 6 moves right, your kids can be successful, but you need the other building blocks that you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, I think a great way to look at it, like just to use wrestling as an example, right? We can all think of like a team that's a really great program that's like that team that cradles everybody. Like that's their thing. We can think of a team that's full of like, clearly their coach is pushing leg riding. All their kids are throwing boots in. You know, we can think of that team who coaches are probably pushing a lot of freestyle and Greco in the off season. You see them looking for throws and upper body stuff all the time. And you could think of programs that are really, really successful with any of those strategies or others. And so if you really dissect that, what you come back to is, well, it doesn't really matter what technique we choose to show, so long as it's fundamentally sound, we're competent and confident in coaching it, and we can instill that confidence in the kids that we're coaching. Once you get those three boxes checked, whatever technique you choose to focus on in your curriculum, so long as you're doing those three things, is less important than all of these other, like, for lack of a better word, like soft skills that go into building a program. But those are really the skills that separate the elite programs from the ones that aren't. So. Yeah.
Well, all right. So, all right, let me a more difficult question then. Let's break it down to a little bit of comparing, like talking to a athlete to a coach. Being a former athlete, what was something that you struggled with connecting with your coach, or maybe connecting with the program? Maybe you just didn't understand what coach was trying to tell you. Maybe it was like the way that you practiced, the way you took care of your body, examples like that. What was something that you struggled with as an athlete, but now it's something that you feel you really connect with as a coach and you're able to get across to your players? Is there anything like that? Because, like, I know, like for me, thinking back, I know I worked pretty hard, but I remember my dad even saying how more I could have worked, right? Or knowing how properly to fuel my body as a wrestler, right? How important that was. That was something I didn't understand the first few years wrestling. Now I understood it. I started to become successful, and that's something that I'm really focusing on, trying to drill into my team, is not going to the cafeteria and grabbing pasta or pizza, pack your own lunch, right? That type of stuff. Is there anything that you kind of experienced?
Yeah. I mean, there's so much. The two biggest ones that jump out at me are just weight management. I mean, I cut a lot of weight, and like, I didn't know, I was never given good information about like the most intelligent way to do that. I made it a point to learn a lot more about it. You know, I was really fortunate in having, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Clint Wattenberg. He wrestled at Cornell. He was a couple of years younger than me. Okay. He went on to become a coach at Cornell and the coach of the Finger Lakes Wrestling Club. And he was actually on the Olympic ladder. He never made the team, but he was always finishing right behind Rovat, like third on the Olympic ladder in men's freestyle. He ended up becoming a sports nutritionist and ended up becoming Cornell Athletics, the Cornell Athletics sports nutritionist. And now he actually, even cooler, he works for the UFC as like their director of sports and nutrition performance. So now he moved out to Vegas with his family. But so I've learned a ton from him. I made it a point to learn a ton from him as a younger coach about the right ways to manage weight, the right ways to cut weight, you know, the right ways to fuel yourself, you know, before, you know, within those parameters, before practice, after practice, 24 hours out from a weigh-in, right after you weigh in, throughout the day at a tournament. All those kind of different phases are handled differently. But as a student athlete, as a 15, 16, 17-year-old whose coach didn't know a lot about it at the time either, like, I did a lot of things that were counterproductive. I made weight, but I certainly didn't put myself in the best position to compete optimally doing that. And I think the other thing along that line is, now as a coach, I believe a lot less in cutting weight and a lot more in just finding like the optimal competition weight for kids. And for most kids, that's not too far off from what they weigh. You know, maybe some of the kids at the upper end of the weight class spectrum that have a little bit more to lose. But you know, I'm not a very big advocate of cutting weight anymore. Whereas when I was a wrestler, like, I saw that as my ticket to success, because I was a lightweight and I'm 5'9". So I was real tall for a lightweight. So if I could stay at a lightweight, I knew I wasn't getting any shorter, and I was really able to leverage that body style to my advantage. So that would be a big one. And I think the number two one is definitely just mindset skills and your mentality. You know, you learn a lot, as I think any coach does, about sports psychology. And, again, talking about optimal performance, right? Like just thinking about, just for one perfect example, like the optimal arousal level to compete at your highest potential. Like, do you want to be completely jacked up? You don't want to be completely calm, like you just woke up from an 8 hours sleep. Like the right arousal levels at a different place for different people. I think that my tendency as an athlete was thinking that I was at my best when I was at that like 10.5 level. And now I see with a lot of our kids that it's, if you ask them to think about all their performances and when they performed best and ask them to rate on a scale of 1 to 10 what their kind of level of arousal was, a lot of our kids are saying that they're around a 6 or a 7. So just understanding that was a huge thing. And I mean, Gary, I know this is an area that you know a ton about, but just mindset skills in general, preparing yourself for a match, just, kind of the way you approach your training in regards to mindset and focusing on the process rather than the outcome, the way that impacts your ability to, in the moment, to kind of be resilient and be mentally tough. Those are all things that I certainly didn't know a lot about as a student athlete, and I think held me back. And I've made it a point to kind of learn as much as I possibly could about them as a coach.
Yeah. Great points, Pete. So we talked a little bit of, earlier and offline about your ABCDs.
Yeah.
You want to talk a little about that and how that works with kind of everything we're talking about now, right? The motivation and, you're building the culture and your kids and everything else.
Yeah, for sure. So that was something that like we kind of came up with, like a mnemonic device, an acronym, I guess you could say, in our program to kind of simplify for us as coaches, thinking through how we could work on building like more intrinsic motivation in our guys, because like that's always a huge hot topic of conversation in the coaching community, right? Like you try to motivate your kids as a coach, and then you could get in an argument, well, should you be trying to motivate your kids, or should you be trying to develop kids that are self-motivated? And then you get into an argument about whether that's even possible. Like, are you able to impact intrinsic motivation, or by definition, because it's intrinsic, are you not able to impact that other people as a coach? And it's like a little bit of the whole nature nurture argument. And so, where I come out on it, and again, like this is just from a lot of conversations with coaches smarter than me, a lot of reading, and a lot of trying to figure it out for our kids. I think that I think intrinsic motivation is important, and I 100% believe that you can foster that and develop that in your kids and nudge them in that direction. You can't make it happen, but you can put them in situations by the way that you choose to run your program to move them along the spectrum towards being more intrinsically motivated. And I think the thing that's really important there is that's tied, especially when we'll go through the ABCDs real quick, but that's tied back directly to the culture that you develop in your program. It's tied back to the ability to develop mental toughness in your kids, to the ability to develop your ability to develop like a certain level of commitment and buy-in and engagement from your kids. It's tied into your ability to develop kind of this selflessness and team orientation in your kids. So I think all of that is interrelated, and going back to this like model, this framework has really helped us with that. So real quick, for us, the ABCDs, A is for autonomy, B is for bond, C is for challenge, and D is for direction. So autonomy basically is giving kids freedom to kind of make their own decisions and act on their own. The more you can build autonomy into your program, the more you're going to develop intrinsic motivation in your kids. So just to kind of give some thoughts there for coaches, like a great way to build autonomy into your program is giving your kids choices and letting them make choices rather than dictating everything. And that was, to be completely honest and transparent with you guys, I was definitely more of a micromanager when I was less experienced as a coach, and giving away some of that power, giving away some of those choices to our kids was something that I struggled with. Delegating stuff to our coaching staff a little bit was something that I struggled with, but it's so valuable. So a couple of like quick hacks that coaches can use. I like to call it like choice training wheels. Like training yourself as a coach to get more comfortable giving away some of those choices is giving your kids choices over things that you don't really care about. So like, guys, like, where do you guys want to have the team dinner next weekend? Like, really easy choice to give away. Like, do you really care as a coach if you're getting pizza or burgers? Another one is to give them choices where you're giving them a binary choice, either A or B, but either outcome is acceptable to you as a coach. Like, guys, I know a lot of you have midterms this week. Do you want to start practice on Thursday at 3:30 or at 4 o'clock so you can get a little bit more homework done? You guys decide, leaders, captains, you decide, let me know. The third one I like is where you're giving them a choice where, like, you're giving them two choices, but one of them's the obvious one. So guys, we got to hit a little bit of, our conditioning plan and our periodization plan. We got to hit some running today after practice. I'll give you guys a choice. We can hit 10 suicides in the gym real quick, or we can go out and do the 5-mile run. So, like, I mean, that's like kind of a ridiculous example, but like, the kids are going to choose the sprints, which is what you wanted them to do to begin with. But just the act of giving choice to kids lets them feel like they're taking ownership. And that idea of ownership is really, really critical to eventually developing that kind of intrinsic motivation. When you feel like you're in control a little bit of your destiny, when you feel like you have a little bit of ownership over your wrestling career, you can't help but become, over time, a little bit more engaged and a little bit more motivated.
Absolutely.
The second big autonomy one I would suggest that we started doing, and this is a little bit harder for me, full transparency, but it's been super valuable. As we drift towards later in the season, we'll oftentimes cut kids loose in practice. We'll give them like maybe 15 minutes to just work on their own on whatever they feel like they need to work on with their partner. So we'll set the clock in our wrestling room, so they see it up on the wall. They'll know they got 15 minutes. And this is great for a few reasons, right? It really forces the kids to increase their self-awareness because they know that we do this and they need to know what they need to work on. So we coach our kids to be their own best coach. We basically have them kind of conditioned that at any given moment, a coach could be able to say, listen, what are the 3 things you think you really need to work on right now? And they can rattle off, I need to work on finishing my singles when I'm shooting on a righty single, a sweep, and the guy sprawls and hits a hard whizzer. Like, I really have trouble getting to my finish from there. Great. You need to work on that and make it happen. So it really increases self-awareness. It really increases empathy also, because in a way that's important, because now in that 15 minutes, you're having to kind of split that time with your partner, right? It's not just 15 minutes for you to work on what you need to work on. You need to spend that time working on what he or she needs to work on also. And that
selflessness you were talking about.
Yeah, it builds that selflessness, which kind of transitions into the B in the ABCD, which is bonds. We'll get to in a second. But I've found that, like, doing that later in the season has been really, really powerful, because now, at that point in the season, right, you're at a point in your periodization and your training cycles where you're trying to get kids to peak, right? You're not doing a lot of teaching. You're trying to get kids to refine and sharpen and tighten up their skills that they're going to be taking into the postseason. So for one kid, that might be getting, hand fighting to set up his high crotch. For another kid, that might be like keeping the kid broken down and getting to his turns. And, what I think is less valuable at the end of the season is running these generalized practices the whole time, when it would benefit a lot of our higher level kids, at least, to be able to get really specialized time focusing on the areas that they need to specialize on to be their best. And that helps them not only technically, but it's helping them psychologically also, right? Because this is what I think I need to work on, and coach is giving me time to work on it, and I'm getting better there. So I think there's just a ton of benefits to doing that. But it was, like I said, in full disclosure, it was hard for me to reach the point where I was comfortable giving those 15 minutes away, because I'm of the mindset, like, I don't have enough hours in the day in practice. Like, I'm counting the minutes when I make my practice plan, and we deviate from it. But like, if you're ever in our room for our practice, it's like go, 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 go. It's bring guys in and show something and get them out quick. I don't even like to bring them in anymore. I'll just kind of say, freeze where you are and look in at me, and we'll make a correction and get them going again. So to give away 15 minutes of practice or 10 minutes of practice was sometimes a challenge for me, but the dividends I've seen now make it a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, hey, that was packed with that was just A, and it was packed with a lot of great information right there.
Yeah, sorry, man, I rambled.
No, that's great. I mean, you made me think of a couple of things. One, when you're talking about that autonomy and that buy-in, and the kids feeling like they have ownership, I think not only do they feel like that ownership, but you're starting to allow them to have some ownership. And one of the things, people don't get down on things that they're in on, and I think that's a big factor, right? People don't get down on the things that they're in on. And the other thing that pops in my mind is the best programs, whether it's wrestling, I don't care what sport it is, and even business. The best teams are player led, not coach fed, and that's what you're trying to build there, and that's what the kids are feeling, and so that's a lot of great stuff there.
Yeah, thank you. I get fired up talking about this stuff, if you couldn't tell.
Me too. I love hearing it.
Take us right into B. Take us right into B.
So as I mentioned, B is bonds. So by bonds, we mean basically the relationships in your program. So there's a little bit to unpack there, right? It's the relationships that your kids build with each other, and it's the relationships that the kids build with the coaching staff, and the coaching staff builds with them. So those bonds are really important, right? For a bunch of reasons, right? Your relationship, any coach that thinks about this and spends a lot of time kind of building their program realizes that, like, the relationships that you build with your student athletes goes directly to the level of trust that they have in you as a coach. So, like, the stronger the relationship, the more that kid or those kids are going to buy in. I'll give a great example. We had a kid in our program a few years back. He was a pretty good kid, a pretty decent kid, state qualifier at another school. His family moved to our town, so I'm fortunate enough to have this state qualifier fall into my lap as a junior. Like, we didn't develop him, he moved to our town. I'd like to say his parents moved there for the wrestling program, but that's not true. That most of the kids in our program, I've known since they were on our youth team, our elementary school team. So there's like a lot of trust there. There's a deep relationship there. There's like, I could tell them something that sounds completely ridiculous to them, maybe on the surface, but they would trust, they would believe, they would buy into it because of the relationship we had. And I found it to be a challenge at first, coaching this kid who he wasn't uncoachable. He was very coachable, but there wasn't that background and that pre-existing relationship. So you could just tell there was a little bit more question in his mind about, does this guy know what he's talking about? Does he have my best interest at heart? Like, where are his motivations here? And the nice thing is, what was awesome for me to grow as a coach was seeing the progression over the season. As you saw, like, what we were all about, what our program was all about, the way that we care about the kids in our program, as people first and athletes second. And you could see that trust develop to the point where, at the end of the season, you wouldn't know that he hadn't wrestled for us before. He was kind of buying into everything that we told him, everything that we asked of him. And it really worked out well for him. So,
what are some of the things, Pete, that you do to foster that kind of trust? Obviously you said you have relationships with kids from the time they're in the youth program, and trust happens just over time and being in situations together. But is there anything you do that's more compact when you have a situation like you described, where it's a new kid? Obviously trust is built kind of on the battlefield of adversity. That's when you can trust a little bit more. But do you do special things to try to build that?
Yeah, we do. I'll tell you. So let me, to answer that question, I'm gonna, in typical like Pete fashion, I think I'm gonna give a little bit of a sidetrack, a quick one though. I think that the other thing that's really important about the bonds that I didn't mention, but I think is critically important, and Gary, I know you'll appreciate this, is I think when you focus on the bonds, all of them, between coach and athlete and between athlete to athlete, you are deeply like building up their foundation of mental toughness. because a lot of kids, they're in wrestling and in a lot of other sports, their identity in wrestling is tied to their outcomes in wrestling.
Mhm.
So their self-worth, their value, their self-appraisal is tied to their wins or their losses.
Yep.
And that idea forces kids to put a tremendous amount of pressure on themselves to perform at a high level, because their whole, in their minds, in that moment, their entire value and self-worth is based on whether they're winning or whether they're losing. So when you have strong bonds on your team, you can really counteract that. And what I mean by that is you have a kid in your program who knows that his coaches care about him, whether or not he's winning or losing, when he knows that he loves his teammates and his teammates love him, whether he's the starter or the third string guy, he can suddenly start to separate his value from his outcomes, because he's like, I know that I'm loved, I'm good here. These are my people. I'm part of this, whether I win this match or lose this match. Like, I love them, and because I love them, I'm going to do everything in my power to win this match. But I know that if I don't win this match, like, they're not kicking me out into the cold. Like, they're going to be here for me. So in this weird way, because, you talk about bonds, and a lot of coaches will be like, that's kind of like wishy-washy, like soft stuff. Like, this is a hard sport. Like, we're trying to build hardened warriors, but focusing on those relationships and those bonds, I've found, have made our kids much tougher on the mat, because they're suddenly free to compete hard and remove themselves from the importance of those outcomes. I
can speak for myself. It's a very rewarding feeling for a coach to see where a kid can be comfortable in his own skin. Of course, look, we want them to compete like animals. We want them to go, be the best. But the fact that they feel comfortable in that situation is phenomenal. And we've had, wrestling is one of those sports where you get kids who they're not sometimes the greatest athletes in the world. They're looking for a place to belong. And when you create that for them, there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, for sure. So I think, to answer your question about the relationships between coaches and student athletes, I like to think that there's not a quick hack to that, but there's a lot of little hacks, and I think that's the important thing. It's like the cliche, like, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. So it's doing the right thing by your athletes day after day. And there's a lot of little ways that you can show that. So as a perfect example, like, we'll have a lot of individual meetings. I'll have a lot of individual meetings with our kids, and by that doesn't mean like this highly structured, like 15-minute sit down with an agenda. It could be like a 30-second, 2-minute check-in with someone, but I will try to have at least 2 of those every single day, at least one before practice and at least one after practice. I'll grab a kid and be like, hey, you got 5 minutes after practice today? Or, hey, you got 2 minutes to talk before we start? And it's a check-in where that intentionally the conversation will have nothing to do with wrestling. Dude, right. Just checking in, man. How's everything going? We haven't sat down in a while. I know that I know you had a big math test last week. You get that back yet? How's that going? I know that you have a band concert coming up in 2 weeks. Like, you psyched for it, or is it like a pain in the ass for you? Like, those types of conversations.
Showing that you care about more about than just wrestling.
Yeah.
One of the things
that's huge.
I'm just to sidetrack a little bit. The thing I was thinking about is also physical contact. Wrestling, obviously, we have a lot of physical contact, but it's usually combative. But I was reading an article talking about the NBA, and they were saying the teams that have physical contact with each other, the most high fives, pat on the back, the hug, whatever, it correlates over like a 10-year period to those teams that have the most contact are the most successful. So
there's a study.
I was thinking about, even incorporating that in our practice this year, maybe when you run in circles, you're high-fiving each other, something like that, just to bring that in there. So another way of building that bond.
There was a study, I think it was focused on the Phoenix Suns, if I'm not mistaken, about the number of, they had someone track. Yeah. I think they had one of their managers track the number of physical contacts they had in practices and in games. And in games, they would track how many physical contacts they had versus their opponents. Really interesting stuff. Yeah. We'll actually do something in that vein and going towards this bond thing where every kid's gotta make contact with every other kid on the team before they leave practice at the end of practice. So like we'll finish practice and then we'll stretch, and some kids will get up and do a little bit of extra work after that. Some kids will get out of there more quickly, but they've got to either fist bump, handshake, pat on the back, every kid to every other kid and every coach before they leave. Which is funny. Sometimes it actually gets funny. The kids love it because there'll be like a kid who's like got to get out of there to go to like a tutor or something, and he'll be like trying to fly around the room and smack everyone real quick so he can like get out the door and jump in his parents' car. And then there'll be like the kid who's like, there'll be like the older kid who's drilling, sticking around, and other kids who want to leave will be coming up to them, and sometimes he'll like intentionally not stop drilling to like fist bump this kid because he'll be like, you got to stay now, dude.
Yeah.
You can't leave yet. You might as well grab a partner and hit 15.
Go work out. Yeah.
Well, let's not get too into trying to tell all of our listeners that they should go around and touch everybody at practice before they leave. Let's go on to how we challenge them. Let's go on to how we challenge. How do you keep the challenge up? How do you keep them, guessing and keep them, working hard and achieving these little goals without even realizing that they're doing it just because it's something that coach told them to do?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big part of it. What you just said, Travis. So I like to think about challenge as like the Goldilocks and the three bears of intrinsic motivation. So like you want to try to find a level of challenge for your kids where it's not too hard and it's not too easy. And that's when kids are really that's when kids reach that flow state where they're kind of in the zone. Like you give a kid a challenge that's just way too hard for him, no matter how resilient he might be, eventually, if that challenge is not appropriate, he's going to reach a point of frustration, or he's going to reach a point where he stops believing that it's possible for him to achieve that. Either one of those are outcomes that we want for our kids. In the same vein, you give a kid something that's just, that he's way more advanced than, like, there's no challenge there. There's nothing exciting about that. There's nothing he's striving for. And it becomes boring. It becomes boring really fast. So we want to try to find that perfect level of challenge. And the nice thing in a sport like wrestling is it's a little bit easier to do because of kind of the individual nature. There's something that this like developmental concept called the zone of proximal development, which is basically the scientific term for that, like, Goldilocks zone that I talked about. Like, you want to find the sweet spot. You want to try to find something where, so studies have shown that the optimal zone of proximal development for a lot of kids developing technical skills, like physiomotor skills, is something like a 50 to 70% success rate. So you want to find something that a level of challenge where they're going to be failing about half the time, basically. That's kind of the level you want to challenge them at. And so it's really easy to tweak things and to create constraints in a wrestling environment, either in drilling or in live wrestling, to create those types of constraints for your wrestlers. So if it's a live situation, and oftentimes, especially with our better kids, we struggle to find a workout partner and live goes for them in the room that might be at the same level as them. Like, if you're the big fish in the room, like, you got to wrestle, like, you got to have a coach working out with you. You got to find, like, you struggle to find ways to challenge them. So, like, using that example, it might be like, you've got to tech this kid in 2 minutes, or you have to tech him all takedowns and you can't hit the same takedown twice. You have to shoot only lefty if you're a righty. There's a million ways that we can get creative as a coach to create constraints. And the funny thing about it is, the more that you create artificial constraints, it's almost counterintuitive, but the more it creates, the more it supports creativity in your kids, because the more you're limiting them, the more creative they have to get to satisfy what you're trying to get them to satisfy within those constraints. So like that's like something we like to do. And from a drilling perspective, when you're developing skills with kids, it might be it might be having different kids kind of give a different defensive feel when a kid's trying to work on a particular finish for a takedown. It might be working on different setups that they're less comfortable and less familiar with to get to their what's ordinarily their go-to leg attack, but getting the setups in different ways. Different feels of hand fighting. If you have different kids that kind of give different feels, but creating those types of challenges to keep their minds engaged.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a perfect example from our program. I had a kid. He graduated in 2017. Pretty good athlete, but typical kid who was like a pretty good athlete, but not the hardest worker. He was always pretty good, but he was pretty good based on the fact that he was just like a pretty good athlete. Never really put in the work.
That's about it.
Didn't put in the work to earn it. And we struggled for a long time. And by we, I guess I mostly mean me. For a long time trying to figure out like how to get the most out of this kid, because you could see like he was just scratching the level of what he was capable of. Like he was never gonna be the kid that was like living in the gym and like loved the grind and is gonna wrestle in college. He wasn't gonna be that kid, but he wasn't coming close to what he could have been. And we figured out like we just needed to challenge him in practice. Like we basically just needed to put him in practice and give him a partner and put those kind of constraints on him. Like when we're drilling, like show him a new takedown and say like, all you want to hit is low singles, but now like you have to find a way to beat this kid. You're not allowed to hit any low singles. And for whatever reason, we stumbled upon this, giving this particular kid these challenges completely engaged his mind. And it suddenly became like this game for him. And he got fired up and he started working harder in practice based on the fact that he'd come in every day and he'd be like, what's my challenge today, coach? What's my challenge today, coach? And he ended up being a 2-time section finalist for us.
Wow.
Which was like that was a huge amount of growth for him and a huge amount of maturing for him. And like, it was with this kid, it was strictly because we figured out that the way to build intrinsic motivation was to challenge him.
So that seems like that was an easy way to take challenge and put it into direction, right? Because if direction is next, sometimes the challenge leads you to where their direction is going, right? Like you were able to take this kid who didn't have a direction. He was just going to kind of float around until he graduated out. And you were able to take those challenges and now focus those challenges into a direction for him. Is that kind of where that strategy builds from, or do you normally got your direction early on?
Yeah, I mean, we actually, that's a great question, because as we go through direction, we can also kind of talk about the way that the A, B, and C, D all kind of interact with each other and play off each other. So I think that's kind of the best high level takeaway from this. But so to answer your question, like for us, direction is just that. It's like the why. It's the greater purpose.
Okay.
So in that situation, right, like for him, while it might not be as great a purpose as like saving the world or something, right, like that, like we were giving him a greater purpose than just coming to wrestling practice every day. So on a general level for us, direction is that why. It's giving them purpose. It's connecting what they're doing to something greater than just wrestling. So that comes back again to what we talked about earlier with kind of really developing this aspirational vision for your program and these compelling core values for your program. Like I talked about the values in our program now: habits, improvement, accountability, family, and joy. But we talk a lot about how living out those core values, we talk about how and why living out those core values will make them a better wrestler, what those look like and how they'll make them a better wrestler. But we also spend a decent amount of time talking about how living out those core values will make them successful in any endeavor. And that becomes really important because we are now giving them a greater purpose. And where that comes into play and where you see that really be impactful for us has actually been our middle of the road level kids, our kids that are the kids in your starting lineup, like not your A kids and not your kids that are just like are the worst, but like those middle of the road kids. And those are the backbone of any program, right? If you look at the way, perfect example, if you look at the way tournament scoring works in wrestling, right? It's the teams that have their kids wrestle back that usually win the tournament, right? The kids that are taking third and fifth, those are the teams that are winning the tournament. So honestly, being able to get the most out of your second tier kids, probably, like, we all have our kids that are self-motivated, right? You give them a partner, you tell them the drill, and they'll spend 2 hours exhausted working hard and getting better every day. But then we all have these middle of the road kids.
Well, yeah,
and so go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, it's those kids when you're looking at the dual meet in the first dual meet of the year, you're going, well, he'll probably get pinned, but he might win. But he'll probably get pinned, but he might win. And then as the season goes on, it goes, well, he could pin him or he could get pinned. And then you're hoping by the end of the season it goes, well, he's feeling nice right now. He's hot. He's on a hot streak. We should get a pin for him. Like, it slowly develops as you're a kid who's like,
right.
It could go either way to, like, as you give him the direction, as he continues to grow, you're like, hey, and we've looked at guys before. We're like, hey, you're no longer a 50-50 guy. Like, I will tell them straight up, I'm like, you are a go out and pin him guy. You are a go out and get a win guy. Like, you need to become that next level because that's where you've been going. You're tracking on a level to get here. Now you need to, like, I think something that some of the young kids, they don't understand is recognizing when they are there, right? Recognizing that, hey, you have put in that work. Now you're and you were talking about earlier, your mental, right? Now your mental needs to click in and be like, yes, I am that guy, right? Yes, I am a go out and get a pin guy. I am a go out and secure a win for the team. You have got to understand that you're no longer that 50-50 guy, and just having the confidence of telling yourself that and believing it, it gets you that win right there, right? You could be a 50-50
for sure
guy, but if I tell you you're a get a win for the team type of guy, that clicks. Definitely.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think that, so what we've seen is, like, those kids early in the season, they're losing as much as they're winning. They're getting disheartened. They feel like they're working hard. Maybe your definition and their definition of hard work might be a little bit different at that point, but they feel like they're working hard. And those kids can get frustrated. Those are the kids that can end up quitting. And those are the kids that when they do quit, it kind of hurts your team because they might be starters for you. And being able to sit down and say, like, I understand you're not winning all the matches that you feel like you should be winning right now, or even that we feel like you should be winning right now, but look what you're getting out of this and what this is going to give to you later on in life. That's where the direction becomes critical for those middle of the road guys. You're reaching them in a way, even though they're not winning right now, you're giving them something to latch onto that they're getting out of a real benefit that they're getting out of being on your team. Even though they're not winning in that moment. And, same idea there is the mental toughness side of things is, I can say to myself, well, I know if I'm developing all these qualities in wrestling, that's going to help make me successful in college and my career and my relationships, then like, screw it. I can just go out and compete hard because, like, it matters less to me whether I win or lose, knowing that, like, I'm going to get something out of this that's going to benefit me for the rest of my life. The hard part is selling that to kids, right? You got to sell that to them so in a way that's compelling. And it's absolutely, you're selling something that's true, but you got to get kids to buy into the fact that you might not be getting the benefit right now on the wrestling mat, but you will. But either way, what you are getting right now is preparation to make you successful in anything else you do for the rest of your life, resilience to help you be tougher. And what I've found for our middle of the road kids is those who are able to latch onto that idea, it further helps them let go of the importance of the outcomes in favor of focusing on the process, because they understand that it's the process that's giving them these values and these life skills that are going to help them later on down the line. Just one more example, I had a crazy great class of seniors in 2017. The story I told you before, that the kid with the challenge, he graduated in 2017. I had another senior that year. We go out to this, well, they don't have it anymore, but we went out to this tournament every year in Suffolk County, Section 11 for us in New York. It was a 2-day, 10 dual meet tournament. So you wrestle 5 duels on Friday, 5 duels on Saturday, right before December break. It was all these large school Division I, like hammer teams from Long Island. And we go out there and it's, probably we take a beating every time we go. We have kids that go 0-10 sometimes. It's really tough for our kids, but that's the reason we go. they get a lot out of it. And honestly, the older kids, as they hate it and they love it because they recognize that they get so much out of it, but they know that what they're getting themselves into. Long story short, we had a senior in 2017, pretty athletic kid, but he was this kid who just was, he found a way to get reversed to his back. Like no matter what position he was in, he'd score a takedown. Like we almost would be like, anytime you take a kid down, just let him go, because you find a way on top to get reversed to your back, like no matter what happens. And we don't get it because you're decently athletic and you're a hard worker. Like something just hasn't clicked. So this kid, as you might imagine, was having a pretty frustrating senior year. He was like maybe 3-10 going into this particular dual meet tournament, and he was 3-20 by the end of the weekend going into December break. So our kids are showering while we catch them. We have like a 2-hour bus ride maybe back to Edgemont. Some of our kids are showering. He's sitting on the bleachers by himself, his head in his hands. I'm like, this isn't going to be good. Like, I know that I need to go talk to this kid right now. So I sat down to talk to him because we literally get off the bus and they're on December break. We give them off like 4 or 5 days through the end of Christmas, and then we come back to practice. I was like, this is the last thing this kid's going to have before I have he's out of touch for me for 5 or 6 days. Like, I need to talk to this kid. And my fears were well placed because he was going to quit. He was done. He was like, I can't. He's like, I understand everything you say. I listen to everything you say, but he's like, I've reached my breaking point. Like, I can't do this anymore. And we talked about direction. We talked about I asked him what he felt he got out of wrestling the last 3 years if he quits right now, and what he felt he would miss out on not finishing this journey with his friends. And, I was basically throwing a Hail Mary at this point. Yeah. But, he got on the bus, and sure enough, like our first day of practice, it was either the 26th or the 27th. He was there that morning. I didn't know if he was going to show up or not. He was there that morning. He put his gear on. We practiced. I think I nodded at him. He nodded back to me. I talked to him a little bit after practice. He's like, I'm in. And that kid ended up, he was going into our sectional tournament. He was the 11th seed, and he ended up taking 5th, upsetting like the second or the third seed in his blood round, in his 5th place match, to take 5th in the section. And to him, that's that kid's NCAA finals, man. That's his Olympic gold medal. All because he didn't quit. And like now he has this immense feeling of pride that he's carried with him ever since, and that'll carry with him forever, because he was in his darkest day and he decided to see it through, and it panned out for him in a way that was really memorable. And it was all a product of the hard work that he put in.
Because you didn't give up on him and he didn't give up on himself. And that's a big message right there. So Pete,
sure.
You've given us great stuff. You obviously have, thought this through. You've developed a real developed structure for your program. And I also know that you kind of have a WinSmarter program. So tell us kind of like, what are you doing with that program that incorporates all the things we've talked about tonight? And, maybe give that message to the coaches and athletes that are listening, and give us a little bit more information about that, if you would.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks. So, so basically maybe 6 or 7 years ago, I was asked to become the vice president of our regional wrestling coaches, Section 1 Wrestling Coaches Association. And when I got in that role, I started seeing a lot of younger coaches who were kind of in the position that I was in 10 years prior, asking me for advice and how we moved from point A to point B in our program and how we did things in our program. And I realized that I really got a lot of pride out of being able to help other coaches build their programs and get better at what they did, to have the same kind of positive impact that we hope that we're having on our kids. So when I made that connection, I asked myself, I was like, well, if this is something you really like doing, how can you do it on a larger scale? So thanks to the magic of the internet, I started a blog, basically a website. And I think at first I was just kind of writing to hear myself write. But then it grew, and I have a large email list now, about 3,000 coaches, and a website with a bunch of blog posts on it. And WinSmarter kind of took off a life of its own a little bit, where now I speak at a lot of coaching clinics. I I do some consulting for coaches and specifically in their programs and mentorship for coaches, some consulting with athletic programs. And I have some online courses as well. So that's kind of the gist of it. Really what it is at its heart is an email list where I'll send out emails. I try to do it once or twice a month. Sometimes it's more, sometimes it's less. Just kind of about this sort of stuff, building your culture, building character in your program, building leadership amongst your kids, kind of all these X factor things that made a difference for us. A big thing for me is like, I don't think that I'm any kind of like guru or expert. I just know that like I experienced a lot of mistakes in my career. I've made a lot of mistakes. And so to the extent that I can talk to coaches about like, well, this worked well for us and this didn't work well for us, so like maybe this would work well for you. Like I love being able to share my experiences in the hopes that I can kind of give some coaches shortcuts to bypass some of the heartache that I had over the years. So that's
Go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
So that's basically what WinSmarter is. I put together an ebook that I'm happy to give to anyone who's listening. And we can talk about the link to the site, but I put together an ebook on my site you can get for free that has 10 of the most like effective and unique strategies that we use in our program to kind of build our culture. So this is some really like hands-on, like tactical things that you can use in your program this year to like build that culture, to build those ABCDs. So that's, the page is going to be, it's winsmarter.com/tiger. So I figured that'd be easy for your listeners to remember. If you go to winsmarter.com/tiger, you can download that ebook for free. And my contact information is there also. I'm always happy to start a conversation about any of this stuff or to answer any questions. It's almost a little bit selfish in the sense that like, and I'm sure you get this from the podcast, right? The more that you get to talk about coaching with other coaches, the better it helps you become as a coach on your own journey.
Absolutely.
So like, I love helping other coaches, but if I'm being completely honest, there's like, it's helping me build my program as well. So it's a win for everybody. And I think that's part of where like the WinSmarter name came from in my mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
smarter, not harder.
And I'll just say this, you said that you don't have all the answers and no one has all the answers, but I think a lot of coaches, especially young coaches, the things that you talked about, a lot of them have that same mindset, right? They want to make their program better. They want to have relationships with the kids. They want to develop their athletes. They want to give them direction. But as we always say, life is not a talent game. Life's a strategy game. And what you've been able to do is to give them strategies. And that's a huge differentiator. I'm sorry. Giving them strategies, tactical, applicable strategies is the key. So I think for those coaches who are listening, who are going to have a chance to check out the book and check out your blog, they're going to get a lot of hands-on things that they can implement right away and get success. And they'll tailor make it to themselves and they'll figure out how it works for them. But the strategies are key. So thank you for sharing that with us. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Pete.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I really appreciate it.
No, dude, we loved it. It was interesting. I can't wait to get it out there. I think a lot of coaches are going to get a lot from it. As I said, we had our last episode, we had coaches on. So I think we were starting to grow our coaches network a little bit even more. And this is going to just take it to the next level. So
awesome.
We'll put your information also in the show notes so people can find it there as well. And if you don't mind, my email, if anyone has any questions about this, you can just email me really easy. It's Pete, Pete @winsmarter.com. Perfect. Pete @winsmarter.com. You got it. Pete, thanks so much for sharing with us tonight. Loved having you on, and we'll see you Matt side, man.
Take care, guys. Thank you very much.
Okay, pal. Thank you.
All right, guys. See you soon.